This is ECG's BroadWorks briefing. We're calling it the unofficial BroadWorks webinar. We're speaking just for our company, ECG, and we're planning to do this each quarter over the next year. So we're glad that you guys are here with us. Our panelists are John Chleboun. He's one of ECG's senior members of technical staff. Background is in telecom and BroadWorks. He's been working with BroadWorks for over 10 years now, really. Welcome, John. I heard you're picking up a new hobby. You're getting started with something new. Tell me more about that.
I'm picking up photography as a pandemic hobby, or trying to. I think that of all the arts out there, it's probably the nerdiest, so that's probably why I'm drawn to it.
Gotcha. So if we can think of a nerdier art, are you going to switch, or are you committed?
But I'd be interested to hear it.
All right, that's good. Astrophotography, that may be a step up.
Yeah, I think it would
potentially.
Be. I haven't gotten into that yet.
And we've got Brian Tate. He's another one of ECG senior members of technical staff and a partner. He came to us from the hallowed halls of electrical engineering, but he's been working in telecom for a couple of decades and on BroadWorks for over 10 years as well. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
So I heard something about you're learning magic tricks with involving a hat. Is that right?
Well, I haven't quite trained the rabbit yet, but yes, our family got a white bunny during the pandemic, and that's been our new pet, our first pet. It's been real interesting. But if you imagine the stereotypical white rabbit that you pull out of the black hat, that's pretty much what Peanut looks like.
Nice. So would you recommend a rabbit as a household pet so far?
I think so. They're not as inexpensive as you might expect, but they're about in the same realm as a domesticated cat or dog, I suppose.
Okay. Nice. Well, a tip I can give you is just don't give it an allowance. So that'll keep it a little less expensive.
Fair enough.
So for a lot of you, you've learned about the webinar through some of our good friends on LinkedIn and other places, and you're not very familiar with who ECG is. So we're a company that makes the network work. We don't develop the call processing software like BroadWorks itself. We develop other tools and do other parts of the project, like helping select the software, configuring the software, and doing the integration and remediation as we connect things together. Acceptance testing and compliance certification, so looking at whether you're really meeting all the standards that you need to and want to meet. And then we do training and operations support as well to help you keep your voice and data network running. Our customers kind of run the gamut. Some of them are data center operators, internet service providers, voice operators. Some of them are service providers. Some of them are institutions like public entities that have a large-scale telecom system, with 40,000 plus users on one platform. Some of our BroadWorks experience we're proud of goes way back. We did as part of an RFI RFP process back in 2002. We evaluated the market, said we think BroadWorks is going to be a winner, and we're proud of that. That was a really good call, we think. That platform is actually still up and running, as well as over 100 other BroadWorks platforms that we've helped to set up. We also did one of the first TDM SS7 integrations with BroadWorks, so basically a PSTN gateway, and we worked through the integration with the configurations on both sides to make that work. Back before there were any partner config guides or any other assistance like that, we worked through that. So the folks that you see listed on the bottom of this slide are just some of our customers who've used us for engineering projects mostly, and a few of these are customers on training as well. So our agenda today is going to be 3 main sections. Top news. We're going to go through sort of a lightning round of some of the top news that's come out, things that are sort of forward-looking, and because this is our first, we have the advantage of talking about a lot of the things that have been announced and that are on the roadmap that most service providers are not using quite yet. Next, we're going to go into some detailed briefings. We're going to focus on what those directions are in a little bit more analytical view, also automation and system management support, and then looking at the Webex integration and ecosystem, which has got a lot of excitement around it. And then finally, we're going to be taking your questions. So please send in your questions throughout the panel, and as we're talking about things, and we'll try to come back to those and finish up our session with those today before the top of the hour. So we've got a lot to cover here. Are you guys ready to get going?
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to start with our top news. today, and we'll roll through this. So, John, I think get us started.
Yep. So according to data from Google Trends, the interest in the search terms BroadSoft and BroadWorks has actually grown in the last 2 years when we compare it with the 2 years before Cisco's acquisition of BroadSoft. So, and this suggests that despite the reduction of the direct marketing for those two brand names, general awareness of the BroadWorks platform is still around.
Thanks. And Cisco is investing in improvements in the execution server, the XS component, primarily used by mobile operators in IMS deployments. They're adding PBX and unified communications features that were previously only available on the application server mode. Some of these features include call logs, push to talk, and group paging. And previously they just weren't available to those that were deploying IMS. So those mobile operators now have a chance to take advantage of some of those efficiency enhancements in the long-standing SIP feature set for like busy LAN field, including reducing the number of SIP messaging in that popular feature.
So another interesting area is in system management, and one of the big changes that's coming for those operating BroadWorks systems is that all the servers except for the application server are moving away from patches, and they're moving to release independent versions. So this means that those servers will not be patched anymore, but instead they're going to be upgraded periodically. So the upgrade process is substantially simpler in general than the patching process. For most servers, this removes the long-standing capability of picking and choosing individual patches, relying simply on instead on activating the desired functions instead of not installing those individual pieces of software.
So the ADP, the new application delivery platform, is replacing the profile server and the extended services platform, or XSP. Applications will be deployed to the ADP in largely the same way that they were deployed on the XSP and the PS, and then tools are provided to convert existing servers to the ADP.
So stay tuned for that. Also, the Network Function Manager, the NFM, it offers a replacement to the previous, the EMS or the Element Management System for BroadWorks. And it now includes a pre-configured collection of KPIs or key performance indicators for monitoring BroadWorks so that you can make sure you have that element management that you need, or perhaps even some network management, be able to manage other network elements as well. Up until now, easily seeing whether or not the BroadWorks platform was functioning well has required extensive development work and or third-party solutions, but now you can get an at-a-glance view that's a mature product.
So as we're going to cover in more depth in a briefing following this section, Cisco's moving further to adopt Ansible, a product from IBM's division Red Hat, for server automation. So Ansible promises to change the way BroadWorks server software is installed and maintained on servers, ideally reducing the fairly painstaking process of copying files and cross-configuring servers on the command line.
On documentation, Cisco has made progress moving to a standard Cisco documentation format, announcing today that field notices would get published on cisco.com. Cisco continues to send email alerts to notify customers about changes required to maintain their platform.
So, and many of you know that the call center features continue to evolve, but BroadWorks has deprecated the ability to generate reports on BroadWorks. Back in April 2019, it was officially in the sale, and now call center event reporting, or CCER, if you want to use the new acronym, has been added to BroadWorks to record events to a JSON formatted text files and enable the BroadWorks operator to then take those files, have them automatically pushed off of the application server to another third-party solution or homegrown solution to format those reports in whatever way works best for you and your customers.
So another enhancement related to call center is called Supervisor Coaching. So it's another way that a call center supervisor can assist an agent. So it allows the supervisor to join a call center call and speak only to the agent, but not allow the the regular caller, the person who's called into the call center, to hear the agent. So that's another enhancement on call center that's come out recently.
We're not going to get into a lot of depth in this, but if you're using RoutePoint, Cisco is releasing several new features around the programmable RoutePoint API, including some for call center agents. And these can enhance the operator's abilities to develop more complex call flows for calls that are routed through BroadWorks.
Transitioning to BroadWorks device management, the management of Cisco devices will get easier with the new device activation functionality, and it's added to simplify the assignment of the SIP endpoint devices, or the phones in most cases, sometimes soft clients, to the users in BroadWorks to which they associate. The device vendors will continue to rely on other platforms for device activation, some of those being in the cloud.
So there's new TLS capabilities in the servers. We're going to talk about some of those soon. But despite those new capabilities, Cisco continues to recommend the use of a web application firewall or a load balancer between SIP access devices and the device management web server. Now, this mirrors ECG's recommendation. We have no concern with this. We're definitely simpatico on this particular point. But it's just an interesting network design element that they're continuing to maintain. So that device is intended to mitigate DDoS attacks. It performs certain TLS functions and prevents other attacks against the XSP. But it's just an interesting point that this continues to be part of their recommended design, that even with these TLS enhancements they've got, they're still recommending that as a standard piece that can be deployed in front of your XSP server.
The speed that we can generate config files in our platform will get a boost in R24. In R24, the number of CPU threads available to generate config files can be managed.
So another enhancement around device management is that there's a new kind of custom tag that basically creates a concept of device family so that we can share tag sets between a related device type. And another related new capability is that tags can be automatically tuned or customized by BroadWorks based on the region or country of the device. So it gives us some additional automation capability around your device types that formerly would have been done with custom tags.
And it's interesting to know that since Cisco's purchase, the addition of new partner configuration guides has kind of dropped significantly. It's from 62 new device types just prior to 2017 to only 8 new device types in 2019. Device and software makers may be taking a wait-and-see approach to Cisco's management of BroadWorks before introducing more configuration guides.
Moving into Cisco integration here, many carriers are going to market with Webex for BroadWorks. While some are still maintaining the classic UC1 Collaborate or UC1 SaaS, also called sometimes UC Connect, Webex for BroadWorks will be covered in a briefing. It removes the option of a branded mobile app for each operator, each carrier. At a recent event, Webex One, some at Cisco called that app Your New Desk Phone. But at the same time, they announced a new desktop device, the Webex Desk Hub.
Some new integration enhancements allow other Cisco calling platforms like Unified Communication Manager and HCS, the hosted collaboration solution, to add cellular network integrations through BroadWorks. This suggests a pretty clear bifurcation between the carrier-focused BroadWorks and the enterprise-focused UCM and HCS.
So enhancements were added to support compatibility with new E911 emergency calling regulations in the U.S., including Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act. BroadWorks can now send notification via email when an emergency call is placed. And BroadWorks already had some of the other necessary infrastructure to support these new regulations, including the ability to send a distinct caller ID for each user who's placing an outbound 911 call, even if these users don't otherwise have a DID. That's a feature that's potentially required for new dispatchable location requirements.
And BroadWorks can now directly contact Shaken and Stir servers to do the secure identity attestation and verification. This will help operators comply with the FCC rules that were published in September, requiring call authentication tagging even for calls within the network, their own network.
The enhanced encryption standard TLS version 1.3 appeared in the command line on the ADP. That's the new server that's replacing the profile server in the XSP, indicating that support for that new standard is on the way. It's not available yet, but it's coming. An interesting point for operators is that with eventual migration to TLS 1.3 and perfect forward secrecy, which is a fundamental part of that standard, some of the conventional approaches to troubleshooting your network will no longer be available. So changes will be required.
Some changes have been made in the platform to allow operators to anonymize or encrypt personally identifiable information, PII. This includes the obfuscation of passwords, which have for a long time been visible in some logs. This will help operators comply with California consumer privacy laws, European Union's GDPR, and the United States Federal Healthcare Data Law, HIPAA. Cisco doesn't certify compliance with any particular standard, so this leaves it to the service providers or to external assessors like ECG to confirm the particular encryption standards against those regulations that you're trying to guard against.
And encryption in transit, not just file-based encryption, but support for encryption in transit gets a boost with HTTPS support for the transfer of media files between BroadWorks servers. And many other file transfers are already encrypted and can employ TLS security.
To support robocalling prevention, blocking programs that are allowed now, BroadWorks says inbound call blocking support, allowing numbers to be provisioned for blocking, and it allows up to 10 million telephone numbers to be provisioned from which calls will be blocked by BroadWorks automatically.
Cisco recently held the Webex One conference as a virtual event in early December, which they promised as a replacement for BroadSoft connections that we all have known and loved. While they did have a few BroadWorks focused sponsors supporting the event, the primary presence of BroadWorks was really behind the scenes of the calling platform for Webex calling. No real sessions were held focusing on BroadWorks, and the Cisco staff performing the one-on-one demos were generally focused on Webex and the unified communications manager features.
Before we go to our next briefing, I do want to bring up one clarification on, there's a little bit of a distinction on the ECCR. We talked about the enhanced call center reporting and its replacement with call center event reporting. And just to be clear, one of our contacts let us know that ECCR is not actually deprecated, but what is not available is to purchase a new DBS platform license from Oracle. So that does change it so that ECCR will continue to be supported, but you can expand a database server according to this contact. We can cover other details on that later. I've got a couple of other questions we'll cover here at the end, but I wanted to provide that little factual update for accuracy. So thanks, guys. Thanks, John. Thanks, Brian. We're going to move into our briefings now. The first briefing is on directions, where Cisco seems to be headed with BroadWorks. So despite the lack of marketing, we see a lot of promising signs in Cisco's management of the BroadWorks platform. Among them, BroadWorks is the core for Webex calling, like we just mentioned, and the integration of Webex and Cisco, which we'll discuss later in another briefing. So as we've analyzed the new software that's announced and the future directions that we see discussed, we see four main areas where Cisco is investing to keep the BroadWorks platform going. The first area is integration with Cisco products. So Webex, to be covered in more detail, is a major move for mobile device users. It really affects the apps that they're using on their phones and kind of the functionality and whether they have multiple apps or a single app. It means BroadWorks operators can continue to be in a key position for the communication even as their users are moving to more meeting platforms, which really don't rely on E164 or PSTN calling of any kind. Related to that, Cisco devices are continuing to evolve on two main fronts. One is Webex devices, and we mentioned the Webex Desk Hub, And so with the integration between BroadWorks and Webex, that has the implications for the way people do regular business with the PSTN, with calling inbound and outbound, but also for, of course, meetings. And then Cisco continues to develop on classic desk phones. So these are the SIP devices, and there's new features for making those easier to add to the platform. Another really interesting point here on their integration is the Hcs and Ucm integration. So for folks who are using one of these classic Cisco calling platforms, they're now integrating them with BroadWorks for mobile use, so for cellular phone use. And this is really interesting because it represents a clear division between the carrier products and the enterprise products. And that's one of the things that a lot of us have been looking for. The hosted communication or collaboration platform, HCS, was something that was available to carriers and was used in a pretty big way when they brought BroadWorks in. And so this kind of serves as at least one product management decision that tells us that the existing strength that BroadWorks had in one feature set is something that they're going to exploit rather than replicate over on the other side. Obviously, these are both strong, capable products, but it's helpful to see a distinction there between the two. The second area where we see development and that's important is on system management. And the big push here we see is simplification. So there's a removal of most patching, and that's going to really be a welcome relief. While it does take away some flexibility, it grants us big gains in simplicity, and that should reduce some costs and timeframes. And frankly, it makes it possible for Cisco to actually do the level of testing that everyone wants. If you've got 10 possible patches for a server, which means it's a very new server if there's only 10 patches, then that means there's 2 to the 10th, or there are 1,024 possible combinations of patches. And BroadSoft and Cisco have never tested all the possible combinations of patches. And so ECG has long recommended that you patch update to patch bundles, and basically you keep up to date on the expectation that you're installing all of the patches. Well, that's basically the same school of thought as just upgrading the system altogether. So we think that simplification is going to be a substantial improvement for everyone involved. But in addition to that, the use of Ansible and technologies like LDAP and NetConf should move BroadWorks operators out of the late 90s methods that we've been using and working with for some time. Now, I liked the late 90s. I had a lot of fun in the late 90s, but it's good to see some direct supported evolution of the software management. A lot of folks have been working with tools like Puppet and Ansible independently, and it's great to see Cisco standing behind that kind of innovation. A third area that is of interesting continued innovation is for IMS and mobile providers, including these mobile operators, with the new unified communications features available in the execution server. That means many more of these providers can enable business services. So the things we think of as unified communications or hosted PBX now become open and available to a lot of other providers. This also relates to the integration of Cisco UCM and HCS with BroadWorks, so those users on classic Cisco platforms can get those advantages of mobile integration. So it's a good sign to see Cisco continuing to grow and innovate to help these existing operators who have this huge installed base of millions of users routing calls through BroadWorks today. And it suggests that mobile operators, if they're implementing these features, it's because somebody wanted them. These mobile operators may want to make inroads into the business PBX market using mobile devices. So the last area where we see some good responsiveness is on compliance, especially around new privacy laws, as well as anti-robocalling, such as Shake and Stir, and the building blocks for the mental health hotline 988, which is a new regulation. So we've got the tools in order to stay compliant with new regulations. And honestly, the American market has moved very fast in the past 3 or 4 years with new regulations that have been coming out. Some have called these new regulations breathtaking in their scope, because they really have put a lot of new obligations on providers, and a lot of folks who were not a regulated entity in 2018 are now operating a regulated voice service provider today. So improved encryption will be required to stay current with a host of new laws going into effect in US and Europe, thinking about the California consumer protection laws, thinking about GDPR, and HIPAA, which has ongoing implications for those doing business with healthcare providers. Shake and Stir has been moving fast in US regulations, and I've been glad to see Cisco keeping up the pace by adding compatibility necessary with the rules that were just announced in September. So it's really good to have that available and to have a provider that's really staying on top of it and they're prioritizing the features that are necessary to stay compliant and to do what's needed there. So these 4 areas show us that Cisco isn't yet shrinking the innovation investment in BroadWorks in any way that ECG can perceive. And as I've mentioned, we've been watching it for decades. This isn't a small team of developers trying to keep up with a backlog of work. This is a multi-pronged, multinational workforce that continues to develop in ways that seem appropriate for a large, sophisticated installed base. So I think we're seeing another good case as we zoom out and look at just how Cisco does these acquisitions. It's another good case where Cisco is managing an acquisition well. I'd like to see better marketing and messaging, but I will say for existing BroadWorks operators, the future is bright. So Brian and John, I'd welcome your thoughts on, what do you see as some of these important changes? What's the most important change you guys see?
John, I'll let you go first.
I'm going to go with the really exciting one of compliance. And I know that a lot of us, we can feel like these are burdens, heavy burdens that have just been laid on our shoulders. But these are things that are really, really important and have the possibility of doing some real good. And so I think it's really important that we jump on board with these. I think it's really important that BroadSoft, that Cisco in BroadWorks is giving us some tools to help handle these.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot along the same lines. It's the compliance things, the things that are providing, to overlap a little bit, to provide some standard system and server management. I like to see some of that consolidation to where it makes the platform seem more robust even to the users and more transparent. And so it's that, and then the compliance for not just security, but also the new mandates with regard to robocalling, with regard to suicide prevention. Those sorts of things stand out the most to me.
Yeah, it's interesting that both of you guys keyed in on that they're keeping up. I mean, compliance, when you've got basically political actors like the FCC and the staff, and frankly, you have the Congress passing the Trace Act in 2019. These things move pretty fast, and they move faster than a normal business roadmap would. So you got a software development team, and they're planning out what they're going to develop for a long time. And I've been really glad to see Cisco jumping right in, obviously prioritizing what needed to be prioritized. Now, some of these things, I still think there's work to be done there. There's improvements to be made. I mean, to comply with GDPR, to be able to have, implement the right to be forgotten in BroadWorks, that's tough. I mean, it's really tough. I don't know of actually commercial platforms that really make those things automated and straightforward and robust and reliable. But it's good to see that these things are being taken seriously and that they're not leaving us on our own to manage these systems separately. So let's move into our next briefing. Brian Tate is going to talk about automation and where BroadWorks system management is evolving.
So I'm excited to talk about automation with BroadWorks, and also maybe touch on some of the security aspects of it too, because it's becoming more hand in hand, the two topics. So I'll start by talking about Ansible, and that was mentioned briefly earlier. I think Mark mentioned that it's a software product that comes out from IBM's Red Hat. So IBM bought Red Hat about a year ago or so, and Red Hat was founded back when I was still in high school. But they've also purchased the CentOS project, and so as they kind of developed expertise for the operating systems that are core to BroadWorks, it only seemed natural in my mind that they would also help integrate with BroadWorks, as BroadWorks and the operating system are seen as something that needs to be working together for security compliance. So what is Ansible? It's an automated software management solution. Some people say it's information technology made simple, because fundamentally it is a software configuration management solution that, in the case of Ansible, it's based on SSH. It uses keys and or passwords to automate configuration tasks. Well, it's something that's sold separately. It's not something that Cisco is going to sell you. But I'm excited about the integration that BroadWorks and Ansible is now has with release 24, and even patched back to release 23 and 22. Real quickly, there are some competitors to what Ansible does. You may have heard of Chef, you may have heard of SaltStack, or more likely you've heard of something called Puppet. Each of those are kind of competing with Ansible for automation. BroadWorks chose Ansible to make it easy for BroadWorks operators to integrate their platforms with Ansible to accomplish specifically server software activation. There's some other things that Ansible can help you with, but the real motivation seems to be simplifying software activation, going back to what we talked about where BroadWorks components are based on a release independent software and don't have patching anymore. So the idea that you may have to upgrade more frequently instead of patching, well, this takes some of those headaches away. Ansible, going back to it real quickly, Ansible has some specific concepts in the way they think of things. So a node in Ansible, it corresponds to a BroadWorks server. And then you can have inventories of those nodes or hosts. And then there's variables, there's modules, which are basically groupings of Python code because Ansible is based on YAML files in Python. There's a couple of different types of modules. They've got core modules that you get out of the box. And then there's custom modules, which you can either develop or you can get from a third party. So those modules can be organized in ways that become tasks or things that are operated on nodes. And then those tasks can be organized with the modules and the variables and what have you into playbooks. And so those playbooks are really kind of the fundamental term when you're talking about Ansible and BroadWorks. I see someone has already asked, will Cisco provide Ansible playbooks for customers to use? And the answer is yes, they already have. So there's actually a couple of different tar-zip files that are available in Exchange already. One published in July, another in September for you to work with. So these playbooks depend on, Ansible structure, depends on an Ansible deployment. And that deployment typically has what's considered a control server. And it's not actually a BroadWorks server or BroadWorks component. It's a server that does the SSH connection to all the other BroadWorks servers to automate the different tasks and execute the playbook against the different nodes. And when it does that, one of my first questions when I hear something like that is, well, is it redundant? So Ansible is redundant. You can deploy two servers, a primary and a secondary. So if the primary is not doing its job, the secondary can take over. But earlier I said its primary motivation is helping with software activation, but it can do some other things. It can take the software, the binary archive files, basically the installation files, it can transfer those files out to the servers. It can push out license files to the servers. It does it in the usual places by default, the /bw/install. It can do pre-installation checks. It can automate the actual installation or running those new software installation files. Again, I mentioned it can manage the licenses. And then all that is a prelude to the magic of it activating the software. And it's not something that you necessarily have to say, okay, well, I'm going to activate it for one server, then the next server, then the next server. The playbooks allow you to leverage the simultaneous and the sequential nature of running tasks with Ansible so that it will automatically apply the best practices from BroadWorks software management guide about which server to do first, to do the primary first before the secondary. And it handles those dependencies for you. So it makes it easier to get it right. One thing to mention is that it does support R22 and beyond. There is an exception where I've seen where a release 21 SP1 network server is also supported, but the release independent and R22, if patched and beyond, can take advantage of this. One other thing that was mentioned, I think by John earlier, he was talking about the application delivery platform. And I think this is a really cool thing about Ansible, is it offers a way to automate the conversion of your existing profile server and or XSP to become an ADP. So for those of you who are just new to the idea of what an ADP is, it's the new BroadWorks component that hosts the applications much like you had hosted on the profile server and the XSP before. So the ADP is release independent, and it streamlines things with, especially with R24. There is, if I didn't make it clear before, the Ansible, in addition to it having a redundant architecture, it easily supports both redundant and non-redundant BroadWorks solutions. So if you have a geo-redundant BroadWorks platform, and I imagine we all do, it handles the dependencies between those servers and the order. It does this with custom modules. So if I mentioned earlier, there's core modules that you get with Ansible, and then there's custom. Those custom playbooks are basically those playbooks are the custom modules that you need to plug in. It supports Ansible 2.8 and later. So I think the latest Ansible is 2.9, 2.10, depending on how on the edge you want to live. So it's the modern Ansible, and I don't see any concerns with versions there. One more thing I wanted to mention about it is that BroadWorks, in deploying this new feature, and I encourage you to look at the feature description and also the user guide for the Ansible playbooks, it introduces an extra API into the software manager for BroadWorks. And that API, kind of like a shell command, it has some JSON output from it, and it allows Ansible to be used in such a way where it can automate the locking and the unlocking of BroadWorks through the software manager, which wasn't possible before. It can query application states for BroadWorks, and then it's actually what does the software activation when the time comes. So I think it begs a couple of interesting questions with BroadWorks and Ansible. One is, who supports Ansible in your deployment? Ansible is it's used a lot on CentOS 7, CentOS 8 servers, which sometimes in some organizations and enterprises and service providers, that tends to be something that's used by the server team or the IT, maybe even a hybrid networking / server team. But in this case, it's giving the BroadWorks or the voice operators an opportunity to leverage their the Ansible tool in a way that maybe previously only your systems or your automation engineers were using. So check your organization to see where the Ansible control should best fall, because it's not native to BroadWorks, but it is a valuable tool for the BroadWorks operators to use and administrators to use to get that done. So I'm interested to know where that best fits and shakes out now that BroadWorks is supporting Ansible. Also, there's a concept where there's some overlap with the network function manager here. And I was talking with my colleagues about that earlier, and whereas I saw the network function manager as preparing the way for network function virtualization for BroadWorks, being able to dynamically spin up servers and resources to provide users with BroadWorks services. The Ansible is really focused on software management and configuration management, as opposed to the EMS type features that I like to think of when I think of the NFM. Both of them can handle the licensing. Both of them can stage and distribute software. But Ansible is key to being able to automate the software activation. And that's the key distinguishment there. So looking forward, since this is kind of an early feature, Mark, what do you think BroadWorks management will look like in a few years? Do you think this will latch on? Do you think there'll be some competition for automation solutions?
You know, if you reduce the labor involved in setting up a new server, standing up a new server that's kind of fully patched, meaning it's running the latest software, and you reduce that to close to zero. So it's as simple as opening a new web browser or something, you know, something close to that. It's a very straightforward, it's a task that you don't think of as having any substantial expense. Then that will change the way people operate BroadWorks systems. You know, think the ADP is probably the easiest example because these things need to scale up regularly. Right now, if you needed to set up a new XSP, well, there's some real work in getting this up to date, getting it installed. Now, there's additional work with your firewalls and the rest of your network to prepare, and that Ansible may not take care of that on its own using only the playbooks from Cisco, but it gives you a hook. It gives you a place to do that same kind of work. So if I needed to modify my firewalls, potentially I could do that with Ansible at the same time when I add the new server. So I think it gives us some real opportunities to reduce that complexity and that cost of that labor work of setting up new servers so that we can spend our time on other things as well. I mean, those of you who've worked with ECG, you know, this is the kind of work that we do a good bit of. Well, it would be nice to actually just make this more efficient so that it takes a lot less time and therefore cost everybody less money. But it takes a lot less time to actually stand up and deploy these servers and put them to work. I think what we also need is the ability to push configuration into them to do the cross configuration. So if we genuinely want to say, well, I need new servers to handle device management, for example, I can readily go do that. If I need new media servers, I can readily go do that. I can add these new media servers. Now, I still need to obviously acquire the right licensing, but I can do the deployment of the media server very readily. And that will reduce some of the problems, some of the sources of sometimes outages due to it takes so long to stand up something new. It'll allow operators to optimize how things are organized better. They'll be able to sort of relocate services between virtual hosts or cloud hosting providers more readily. So I think that's naturally going to have some real positive benefits for how people run their networks.
Gotcha. Hey, John, did you know that the Cisco TAC engineers actually use Ansible to spin up and to keep up with the latest releases internally?
Didn't know that, but I'm glad.
Does that give you confidence that this is something that's not going to go away, that this is something that's a real new feature that will help, will stick around?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we all know that BroadWorks is particular about things in the underlying operating system changing out from under it. And so I think that it is really important that BroadSoft and Cisco, that they are working towards supporting this well, that they're working towards giving some guidance on how to use it, and that they're using it internally. I think there's going to be growing pains if a service provider is rolling this out, but I think that those growing pains will be worth it.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's cool to have automated configuration management where you can execute a mop the same way each time. There's a fancy little term called, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but idempotency that Ansible uses to describe, thanks, to describe the idea of, well, other computer scientists use it too, but to describe the idea that when you execute a task, the node or the server, it should be in the same state no matter how many times you execute that task. Mm-hmm. So living by that kind of standard also kind of makes me feel like it's more deterministic. It's reliable. I am a little bit concerned from past experience with the different internal groups at some enterprises, service providers, working together, just like software engineers and network engineers working together. Now we've got folks that normally just handle the virtualization or the operating system. And they may already be using Ansible, or they may be using Salt or Puppet or another flavor to automate the configuration changes in the OS. And here BroadWorks provides Ansible to automate the BroadWorks configuration changes and software activation. And is there some synergies there that'll be found? Does it help with the conversation between the groups? I'm hoping it does.
Interesting future there that you're painting there as the groups get together. We're going to move now to John Chleboun's briefing. one app to rule them all, connecting BroadWorks to Webex?
Yeah, so Webex is really Cisco's answer to Slack and Microsoft Teams and all the others. Now with Webex, BroadWorks service providers, they can offer an app that has huge levels of name recognition among our end users. I think that's a great thing. Webex for BroadWorks, it integrates the Webex apps with the cloud features. It integrates the Webex apps and cloud features with an existing BroadWorks platform. It gives us access to all the BroadWorks calling features. Voice and video calling go through BroadWorks or the Cisco cloud, depending on the configuration and whether you're calling a Webex user or not. And then things like persistent chat, discussion groups, meetings, file sharing, whiteboarding, all those are done via the Cisco Webex cloud. Right now, there are two apps, Webex Teams and Webex Meetings, and those two are in the process of becoming the one app to rule them all, called Webex. For the mobile clients, that's largely done. I guess Microsoft won the battle for the Teams name, but I think Webex is still very, very recognizable. I want to cover some of the implications of this move from UC1 to Webex for BroadWorks operators. The UC1 apps will be going away, replaced by the Webex apps. And as I said earlier, the collaboration features in Webex are handled in the Cisco cloud. So this means that the BroadWorks UMS, USS, and UVS are no longer necessary for the operator running with Webex for BroadWorks only. And this is, those servers will probably be going away in the not too distant future as well. This leaves us less servers to manage as operators. One note is that push notifications from the BroadWorks XSPs for inbound calls, they are authenticated and sent through Cisco's NPS proxy service. This means that operators no longer need to manage Apple and Google push notification keys. That's done directly with Cisco now. The XSP architecture is a bit different under Webex. We have dedicated XSPs for Webex. That's strongly encouraged by Cisco. The exception to this is the NPS. So the application server can only support one NPS cluster, so that cluster is shared with any other apps that use NPS, like UC1 Connect. And a note to keep in mind is that NPS proxy requires that the latest and greatest TLS and push settings be on your NPS. And so the legacy apps will need to use them as well. There's a little bit of a migration there, it's not too bad. And Webex for BroadWorks dictates that the NPS XSPs must be distinct servers from the Webex XSPs. And so depending on how your XSPs are set up now, you might need to shift things around a little bit. Let's talk about the apps. So end users get the Cisco branded Webex apps from the respective app stores or from the Cisco website. Single sign-on integration is available. API provisioning of the Webex users is also available. So these are distinct users from the BroadWorks users. These are the Webex users that are managed in the Webex cloud. Flow-through provisioning is also available. To make this go, BroadWorks is set up to use the Webex URL for the integrated IM&P service. So how this works is that when a user logs into the Webex app that they downloaded off the App Store, they log in for the first time using the service provider's domain that is claimed in the Webex cloud. The Webex user is provisioned in the service provider's organization in the Webex cloud. That brings us to branding. There are some branding options coming, but right now the roadmap is definitely not as extensive as UC1 Connect. The way this works is that Cisco publishes the app, and there's currently no option for service providers to publish their own app. Now, there are pros and cons to this. A pro is that the service providers don't have to publish their own app and all the development and maintenance that comes along with publishing your own app. A con might be that we become dependent on Cisco's software release process, for better or for worse. The apps are released at a steady cadence. If there are bugs, then mid-cadence releases will come out. But we have no control as operators. We don't have control over the cadence of the mobile apps that are released in the app stores. There is some control over the upgrade cadence of the desktop clients, but not over the mobile apps. This is not exactly a branding, but kind of related topic. One option we do have is to show or hide the Webex call button or option within the client. So this means that you can steer all calls, even if one Webex user is calling another Webex user, you can steer that call through the BroadWorks platform in order to leverage all of the features that you have for your users there, unified messaging, etc. Then finally, one thing that is not in the app yet, but hopefully coming soon, is BroadWorks Enterprise Directory integration, so that when you're searching in the contacts in the Webex app, it will also search through the Enterprise Directory as well. I hope that's coming soon. I think that this last one about Enterprise Directory really illustrates the point that Webex for BroadWorks is really first and foremost the Webex app. And that app is currently in the process of gaining the BroadWorks features that UC1 Connect had, but we're not all there yet. It's still in the process. I will say though that in summary, I think as we adopt Webex for BroadWorks, we can really benefit from the Cisco Webex name recognition. We can also really benefit from all the fancy features that they have and are continuing to develop for this app. It's come a long, long way. I think it is also a classic example of, as we move towards the SaaS model, we lose some control, but we also gain some convenience. Mark, I'll turn it back over to you for our last bit. We're running close on time.
Yeah, thanks for covering that. I think we've got time for some comments. Brian, do you have any follow-up thoughts or any thoughts on the Webex BroadWorks?
I'm excited about the Webex for BroadWorks maturing and getting all those features and it being a real competitive tool to use for communication. And I think having a solid enterprise directory is helpful, because like it or not, I don't keep up with people's phone numbers. There was a time when I used to, but that's becoming more important. So having all of those features, including the enterprise directory, is important to me.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me is the importance of software quality here. We wouldn't really be talking about software quality if nobody ever made any mistakes. But occasionally, everybody, even the top software companies in the world, will release some software that's got bugs in it. And so finding a kind of a happy medium between having the service provider make every test and every decision about it the way it is now with branded apps versus having no control and no warning that anything's about to happen and no ability to control what your users are actually using. Somewhere in that space, there's got to be some happy place there. One thing that I would love to see, which may be coming and may be available to some carriers, would be the ability to opt into a program where a service provider could get access to the software, maybe through the Test Flight or a similar program on Android, get access to the new software before Cisco publishes it as a non-emergency release, and then have option of testing it, because this is about not functionally about the software itself per se, but about the integration with my network. And so I'd like to have the ability to know that it's going to work in my network and all my quirks and all my PSD and gateways and all the stuff that I'm doing with my session border controller. I want to know that it's going to work in my exact environment. There's the bazillion possible combinations of configurations. And so I'd like to, and SIP is frankly, it's too flexible to kind of assume it's going to work all the time. Even when you've got a Cisco product talking to basically another Cisco product. So I think having some ability to do some QA up front will be really helpful for operators if that becomes an option and if that can be maintained.
Cisco does offer that option to some service providers. Yeah.
Okay.
It's focused on the features and integration. I think it's less a guard against software bugs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, what you'd want to know is you want to be looking at the version of software that they're promising to release. So they say, we're going to be releasing this on December 21st. So this is the version, we're making it available today. You've got a week to test it, and on December 21st it's going live unless we get an emergency follow-up, something like that. There's no new features here. This is just stable software. It works 100%. That's you want to be sure that you got that kind of testing.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions that have come in our last minute here. Looking through them, one of the questions, we've got a couple of questions on Shake and Stir that came in from our friend Russ. He asked a couple of related questions on Shake and BroadWorks. One of the questions was, what's the integration between Cisco BroadWorks and the CVT, which is sometimes called the analytics server? So what can it do there? As far as I can tell, the functionality would be done at the SIP level. So we would send the SIP invite over with the verstat parameter in it over to the CVT, and the CVT would then do some processing from there. So you'd have that option of using something like that with the SIP integration. Right now, the BroadWorks, the new feature that's released, allows BroadWorks to use the Shaken HTTPS API to connect to an SCI AS or an SCI VS to actually create the attestation, the identity header with the passport in it, or to check the identity header and give you a verification status type of report. There's some more coming, I'm sure, beyond that, but my understanding would be your CVT would have to be done at the your analytics to decide whether you think this is a spam call or whether this is a nuisance call or whether this is an emergency call. That would need to be done at the SIP level separately than that. So that hopefully that answered two of the questions that came in from Russ. There was one other question I'll pass along for John. Actually, no, this was a question on Brian's topic on Ansible. Questions related to the Ansible control server, and I'll ask this for the audience here. The control server, does one have to add a new physical server for this, or does it have to be on the same LAN as other servers? So thanks for that question, Brian.
Sure. No, that's a good question. The Ansible control node doesn't have to be on the exact same network as the BroadWorks servers. Often BroadWorks servers are on multiple different networks. And it certainly doesn't have to be physical. Modern Ansible deployments are definitely virtualized. However, the key piece is the TCP port 22, the network connectivity between the control node initiating connections to the BroadWorks servers. So SSH connections is the default way that Ansible uses to control other nodes, and that's how BroadWorks is the playbooks work. Is it connects over SSH. There can be a key exchange. If you really want to use passwords, I guess you could, but all of that is just done on port 22 TCP, encrypted.
Right, very good. Thanks for that. So another question came in from our friend Jesse, who asked on the BroadWorks call reporting, does this, and he's referring to the call center reporting, does this mean once a DBS has been upgraded, it is no longer handling ECCR reporting? And if it's not handling it, what purpose does it have? Anybody have an answer on that one? So in my knowledge is that you can actually run ECCR and CCER at the same time. So you can have them both running. So basically, you're having a set of JSON files generated and potentially sent off via SFTP, and at the same time, you can have the ECCR running, and you can keep ECCR running. You can upgrade your DBS to newer versions and keep the same functionality running. You can't order new software, though, a new DBS installation that allows you to do that. And there are some limitations on exactly what's available for ECCR upgrades or enhancements. But once you fully migrate over to CCER, the DBS is, I believe, still available for enhanced call logging as a particular feature on certain versions until that migrates over to potentially another server. Any additional comments on that?
Handled it well, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
so if you guys have follow-up questions, here are our email addresses and phone numbers. We'll be glad to hear from you on anything you'd like to talk about. I've also got Trevor Wolford's contact information on there if you're looking to discuss a new project. But we're glad that you came. We will send out a follow-up email and let you know how to order your coffee mug. And you get to pick the one that you want to do that. And send any other questions that you've got, and please come back next quarter when we'll be telling you about new things that have come out and the directions that BroadWorks software is going in next year. So thanks, and have a good holiday season. Thanks, John. Thanks, Brian.